apologies for starting a bit late. We should be starting very shortly. If you may be seated, and we are getting ready to start the official ceremony very soon. Thank you very much for your patience. And there is an excellent representation from different African countries. It's great to see everyone gathered here to witness an important step in the objectives of the African Union. Great work so far. This is a true milestone. We will be starting shortly with all the details. Please come to the main hall for the beginning, the official beginning of the ceremony. Thank you very much. By the way, there's a simultaneous لقاء، وحتكون الترجمة متاحة باللغات العربية والإنجليزية والفرنسية. حضراتكم لو تحبوا تتابعوا الجلسة من خلال الترجمة، حتكون الأجهزة متاحة فخلف القاعة بجانب مكان الترجمة الفورية. Excellency Mr. Wamkele Mene, Secretary General, AfCFTA Secretariat. Her Excellency Mrs. Naveen Gama, Egyptian Ministry of Trade and Industry, who is represented today by Mr. Ali Basha, Minister Plenipotentiary Trade, Ahlan wa sahlan. Distinguished ambassadors, we have a really rich presence today from ambassadors of different African states. Let me welcome the ambassador of Burundi, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Mauritius, Tunisia, Angola, Mozambique, South Sudan, Zambia, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mali. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, hello and welcome to the signing ceremony for the Fund Management Agreement between the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA Secretariat, and the African Export-Import Bank. My name is Dina Salem, and it's my honor to host this ceremony today. Free trade has been one of the main objectives and long sought after dreams for the African nations. An agreement that would drive $292 billion of the $450 billion in potential income gains, and that's according to the World Bank, and lift about 30 million people out of extreme poverty, which would result in a much deserved prosperity for the whole continent. The fact that many of the African countries rely on tariff revenues will create a challenge. Luckily, the adjustment facility will aid the countries that might experience short-term revenue losses from liberalizing trade under the African Continental Free Trade Area. So let me introduce now Dr. Gaynmore Zanamwe, Senior Manager of Intra-African Trade Initiative, Afreximbank, and Mrs. Bethlehem Arega, Senior Legal Officer, AfCFTA Secretariat, to shed more light on the fund. So we're waiting to be joined by Dr. Gaynmore. Hello, how are you doing? So I'll give you the floor.
Good morning, Excellencies. Good morning. Excellencies, Secretary General of the AfCFTA, Mr. President, President of the Afreximbank, Professor Arama, and honorable guests and everyone here who has joined us for this event. We would like to warmly welcome you. As has been introduced, we will be just giving a brief intervention on an introduction of the AfCFTA Adjustment Facility and what we are here to witness the signing of the Base Fund Adjustment Facility. Colleagues, if I can get an assistance, please. Thank you very much, Excellencies, and good morning again. Just to highlight a brief overview, we will be, myself and Gaynmore would be taking you through the introductory parts and the purposes and functions of this adjustment facility fund that we have in place, and the main idea of why we are here today, which is the signing ceremony. Just a brief overview is the Agenda 2063, which is guiding our work today. And for that, we have the Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want, which calls up a public-private partnership and focuses on fostering Pan-African businesses through the growth of regional manufacturing. What makes this collaboration peculiar is that we are collaborating an African Union member states driven process, is collaborating with the multilateral Pan-Africanist institutions such as the Afreximbank, which benefits from membership of African member states, and also the private sector engagement. So this is the typical example of how Africa is driving its agenda through public-private partnership, and we're very happy to have the adjustment fund to witness that. As I have mentioned, while the Agenda 2063 has set the public-private partnership agenda, the adoption of the AfCFTA made it a reality in 2018. At the moment, we have 41 ratifications with 54 countries that have signed the agreement establishing the AfCFTA agreement. What we envisage will be happening in the coming few years is that while the AfCFTA agreement is being implemented, there will be significant disruptions, both long-term and short-term, to the structural transformation will break. And hence this adjustment facility will help member states in introducing, in supporting their industrial sectors because of the disruptions that will be introduced. The estimated requirement, like we mentioned, for implementing uninterrupted AfCFTA agreement, we anticipate is 8 to 10 billion over the next 6 to 10 years. And for that, the Afreximbank has already committed 1 billion of its funds to support the AfCFTA implementation. Now, in July 2019, heads of states also gave us the direction to say we want to have an adjustment facility that is put in place where these funds will be able to support implementation of our institution and our companies on the ground so that they will be able to withstand the disruptions that will be coming. And then the decisions that came also that supported it in 2020 and very recently, as of last week, that we've had numerous calls from member states asking us to actually implement the AfCFTA adjustment funds. Now, the purpose and function of the adjustment facility is to ensure that we provide support through financial, technical assistance and grants to AfCFTA state parties and allowing them to support their women, to support the youth, and to support SMEs and ensure that their companies will strive. So the adjustment facility will be within the Secretariat of the AfCFTA. It will have its board members, it would have a reporting line to member states, and it would have a financial aspect of it that will now be managed by the Afreximbank. The purpose, like I mentioned, is that it will allow for voluntary contributions that will come from member states. It will allow for the creation of funds, different kinds of funds, including the base fund, the general fund, and other sorts of funds that will assist member states. It will also develop and create a compensation facility. It will provide financing to state parties and ensure that they get technical assistances and capacity building programs. As I mentioned, the AfCFTA adjustment facility in the Secretariat will have member states driven process, which will have the Council of Ministers of the AfCFTA on top of its structure and supported by Board of Trustees and the Secretariat as an implementing body to lead this process. The Afreximbank here will play a key role in leading the process, and both the Afreximbank and its subsidiaries will be able to assist us in this process and also work as a fund manager. For the conceptual design and the AfCFTA adjustment facility, I will leave this section to Gainmore to give us a little bit overview of not just the side of the AfCFTA agreement and the decisions that have established it, but rather the practical matters of how is this adjustment facility really going to be run and where are we going with this? These are the answers that Gainmore will be giving us in a few brief moments. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, Professor Rama, SG Wamkele, the representative for the Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Good morning. And I just want to pick from where my colleague has left. She has given you the mandate and some of the reasons why we are doing the adjustment fund. This is a very important instrument that will actually support members to start implementing the agreement from a practical point of view. So what we've been doing is that we've been working with the AfCFTA Secretariat to actually look at the practical steps that we need to take to have a facility that will work to support member states, the private sector, the SMEs, and in particular, women and youth, to ensure that they are not left behind. So we looked at all the adjustment facilities globally, in Europe, in America, in Africa, COMESA, SADC, West Africa. We decided to take all the best experience. But what was actually striking is that our main focus when we're conceptualizing the adjustment fund was that we wanted to focus on what we call AfCFTA-led industrialization. We wanted to ensure that we have goods and services that are produced that can be traded within the AfCFTA. That's why you will find out that the adjustment facility that we've conceptualized is a little bit different from some of the facilities that you may have seen, because we are trying to support member states to address tariff revenue loss in the short term. We are also conscious that unless we make a lot of effort in terms of supporting regional value chains, in terms of supporting the industrialization agenda, we will not be able to have the goods and services to trade amongst ourselves. So this is basically why the conceptualization of the adjustment fund has got all these key elements that I've highlighted. We are looking at member states contributing something. We are looking at the financial institutions. Some of you, we are already in this room. Some of you have joined eventually online. And we are looking at development partners that can actually come and also support. So the conceptualization of the adjustment fund is looking at all the key stakeholders to come and work with the bank to mobilize resources that are required to help member states address tariff revenue loss and implement various protocols that we have. There are a number of barriers in terms of customs, in terms of standards, infrastructure. So the facility will help us to address some of those issues. And we are also conscious that for the facility to work, it must be implemented in an efficient way. So all those aspects were actually included in the conceptualization of the adjustment fund. So the other issue that I want to focus on basically deals with what we call broadly the structure of the fund. As you heard from my colleague Betty, the structure has got 3 funds. So there's the base fund, there's the general fund, and the credit fund. And today we are going to sign the agreement on the base fund. And you may be asking, so what is the base fund? The base fund is essentially looking primarily at resources that will assist member states to address their tariff revenue loss. As the members are dismantling their tariffs, they may incur short-term revenue loss, and we are going to mobilize these resources from member states, from donors, from financial institutions. So we look forward to working with all the key stakeholders to make sure that we have got enough resources to support our member states to continue liberalizing their trade and ensure that the agreement delivers benefits. And the general fund will come in now by way of providing concessionary funding to enable us to implement some of those projects. It could be trade enabling infrastructure projects. It could be those projects that may be required for member states to do some restructuring. So it will mobilize all the concessionary funds that we need from our development finance institutions and other potential investors that may be willing to partner with us in this journey. Then the credit fund is very important, and this is basically where we mobilize commercial funding. And some of you may be aware that within the continent, finance is one of the challenges that we are actually trying to address to ensure that we increase intra-African trade, which you know is already very low, around 16–18%. So we need to be able to mobilize the requisite financial resources from commercial banks and other investors to support the implementation of the AfCFTA, to support the companies, some of them are in this room, to develop regional value chains, to improve their productive capacity, to skill human resources are very important. So some of those issues needs to be addressed to ensure that we can actually trade under the AfCFTA. And it is important that when we are implementing the adjustment fund, we need to be monitoring and measuring what we are doing. So we will have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism that will monitor each and every cent that we mobilize, and it will be very transparent. We will be showing all the players where the money is going and the impact of those resources. And in conclusion, I just want to call upon all our development partners, the financial institutions that are here in the room and online, as well as other stakeholders to work with us to support the base fund by providing grants, technical and financial assistance to be able to implement this important agreement that we believe is going to be a game changer in terms of transforming the industrialization agenda of the continent, creating the relevant jobs that we need in the continent. So we will be kickstarting with the base fund, but in the next few weeks or so, we will then progress to actually also launch the general fund and the credit fund that I've mentioned. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gainmore and Ms. Orega for the presentation. Well, we can say now, Dr. Gainmore, as we were talking earlier, that we're ready for business, and we're really ready to step forward and start working on that incredible fund. Let me now introduce His Excellency Mr. Wamkele Mani, Secretary General of AfCFTA Secretariat, for his remarks. And I would like to tell you that we are joined with almost 1,000 people registered. They've been registered and they're viewing currently online. We are live streaming the event on social media platforms. So we have a really great participation on different platforms. Let me introduce again His Excellency Mr. Mani for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Program Director. Good morning to everybody. Your Excellency, Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Afreximbank, the representative of the Minister of Trade and Industry of Egypt, Mr. Ali Basha, Madam Managing Director, Madam Awani, Madam President of the African Business Council, Dr. Asfor, my colleagues from the bank, the senior executives at the bank, colleague ambassadors, excellencies, who are here this morning, all of you, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here, to be signing today this partnership agreement, this fund management agreement of the base fund of the AfCFTA adjustment facility. I want to thank my colleague, the senior legal officer, Madam Bethlehem Arega, want to thank also Dr. Zanamwe, as well as Mr. Gable, the consultant, the legal consultant, who have been working very hard over the last few months to make sure that this adjustment facility does indeed become a reality. We arrived yesterday here from the Assembly of Heads of States and Government. President Orama was there, and all of the heads of states and government received a report. And the report was very, very clear from the champion of the AfCFTA, President Isufu. It was very clear on what it is that as Africans we need to do to make sure that this agreement becomes a reality. He emphasized in his report to the heads of states, he emphasized the tools that we need to make sure that implementation of the AfCFTA is successful. One of the tools that he mentioned in his report to the Assembly of Heads of States and Government is the adjustment facility. Because we know that there are many countries that as they implement the reduction of tariffs, the elimination of tariffs, that these countries will experience in the short term revenue losses. So how do we make sure that these countries, that their interests are accommodated? This is where Afreximbank has stepped in to become a very, very critical pillar of implementation of the AfCFTA by providing this facility of initially $1 billion to make sure that we implement the AfCFTA the way in which we have agreed. There is no other institution that has stepped forward and that has said, we want to contribute to the development of our continent in the way in which Afreximbank has made available this $1 billion for us to be able to. There is no other institution that has helped us to make sure that the AfCFTA becomes the reality that we want it to become. And so today I am extremely grateful to my senior brother, Professor Orama, Managing Director, Madam Awani, members of the board in its entirety, for approving this facility that will make sure that the AfCFTA is implemented for the benefit of our continent, to advance industrialization, to make sure that our continent is integrated. I think that as we sit here today, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, as we sit here today, we know in this room that we are witnessing a historic moment. I also know that 20, 30 years down the line, today will really be a remarkable historic milestone, because people will look back and they will say, how was this agreement implemented? What are the tools that they used to implement this agreement? And the adjustment facility and the agreement that we're signing today, certainly, in my opinion, is the main tool that we require to make sure that this agreement is successfully implemented. Last month, as you may well be aware, we launched the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System in Accra on the 13th of January. We have, in this partnership between Afreximbank and the AfCFTA Secretariat, we have in the shortest period of time achieved what objectively I would say is remarkable success in how we are going to make sure that trade finance becomes accessible to many Africans and that trade under the AfCFTA becomes accessible to our small medium enterprises, to young entrepreneurs across our continent. So the payments and settlement system will enable us as Africans to overcome these challenges that we have identified for many, many years. The cost of currency convertibility, the inefficiency of trading with a third currency, the lack of competitiveness that trading with a third currency causes. And so we have to be, as Africans, I believe, we have to be extremely proud that we have now introduced these practical tools to make sure that trade in Africa becomes a reality under the AfCFTA. And I don't think that we would have been able to do it as a secretariat without Afreximbank. I was told the other day on the flight, somebody said to me, well, you know, Secretary General, we are worried about your partnership with Afreximbank. We think that Afreximbank has too much influence over the Secretariat. This is what I was told a day ago. So I listened very, very carefully. And then I said, thank you very much for this feedback. But you tell me, if it is not Afreximbank, which is the mandate that Afreximbank has to finance trade in Africa, who's going to do it? Who is going to make sure that small medium enterprises are properly financed, that young Africans have the opportunity to trade across borders on our continent, that there is trade supporting infrastructure on the continent? Who else is going to do it? So I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea that we must accept to work with the World Bank and the IMF, but when it comes to our own institutions on the continent, we raise questions. So I am unequivocal, and I am deeply committed to the partnership that we have. As long as I remain the Secretary General, I told this gentleman, I said, as long as I'm the Secretary General, this partnership with Afreximbank will continue. It will become stronger because it is a practical step that we have to take to make sure that trade in Africa becomes, across borders, becomes a reality. We cannot, as Africans, continue to go cap in hand to the World Bank, to the IMF, and the others to ask to finance our own trade on the continent. So I would rather go cap in hand to Afreximbank, to the African Development Bank, Trade and Development Bank, and say we need you as our African institutions to step up and finance trade, step up and finance our private sector, step up and finance infrastructure that supports trade on the African continent. That's what we have to do. That is what we have to do. I am deeply uncomfortable with the notion that we must go to others in Europe and other parts of the world for them to support us. Afreximbank is owned by us as Africans. It is owned by us. And so, even though I know because of the vision of Professor Orama, we're working very, very well together, but also there is a mandate. There's a mandate that the bank has to support trade finance on our continent. So today is truly a historic day. It is a historic day. It's a day that when people look back they will say that this is one of the main tools for enabling trade finance, for enabling the implementation of the AfCFTA through the adjustment facility. And so I'm deeply grateful to Afreximbank, the board of directors, and to our colleagues who made sure that, that this is a reality. Let me conclude by saying something that many of you would have heard me say. And I'm very, very sorry that you have to hear this yet again from me. We are not going to succeed in the implementation of the AfCFTA. We are not going to succeed without Afreximbank. Because the reality is that you can't negotiate a trade agreement and expect it to implement itself. For better or for worse, I have negotiated many of these trade agreements. And one of the main critique I would put on the table to ourselves as trade lawyers, trade negotiators, is that we negotiate these agreements and then we move on. That's why they don't succeed. That's why there are many around the world who say that why should we care about trade agreements? They just advance globalization. So here we want to make a difference. Here we want to make sure that the AfCFTA benefits not just my friends at Standard Bank or MTN or Glo, any of our big successful corporations, but that it actually benefits millions and millions of small, medium enterprises, the private sector on the continent, the members of the African Business Council that Dr. Asfor represents here today, that the benefits are real and that we see these tangible benefits. If we don't succeed in that, I think that we would have failed. If we don't succeed in making sure that we are inclusive in how this agreement is implemented, I believe we would have failed. As I've said before, if this agreement benefits only South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, the countries on our continent that are already industrialized, that are already relatively competitive, we're not going to succeed in convincing Africans that actually trade does lead to development gains. So we will see a backlash in 20 years' time. That's why this agreement today, that's why this partnership with Afreximbank is so important, because it enables us to address some of these very, very fundamental questions of inclusivity in relation to globalization, trade agreements, and economic development. We have countries that we know today don't have any export competitiveness. We know that. We have countries today that we know in 10 years' time, when they reduce their tariffs to zero, that they will suffer. So who's going to step up to make sure that this particular country that reduces its tariff to zero, that the fiscal deficit that this causes, that it is actually accommodated? If it's not Afreximbank, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? And so I told this gentleman on the flight, I said to him, please sit here next to me. We have 3 more hours on the flight. Let me tell you something. Sit here. we are not going to be able to succeed if we think the AfCFTA is going to implement itself from a trade policy point of view, from a trade law point of view, without the support, the trade finance support that it needs. We're not going to succeed as Africans. And so I am deeply committed, and I am entirely convinced that the partnership that we have is what our continent requires for us to fundamentally transform the structure of Africa's economy. We can't do it without trade finance. We simply won't be able to do it. It will become just another agreement. It will become just another diplomatic exercise where we come once a year at the Assembly of Heads of States and Government, we take photographs, we pat ourselves on the back, we say, well done, but with no benefit to Africans on the ground. That is why this partnership with Afreximbank is so critical. Let me conclude by saying that I know that I was given only 10 minutes. I told the ministers of trade 2 weeks ago that I've heard about 215 as of yesterday, 215 COVID tests. I go around our continent and I listen and I hear young women who are owners of small, medium enterprises. I see young entrepreneurs who want to make sure that they access the entire continent and that their businesses succeed. And they say to me, when are we going to see the benefits of this agreement? When are we going to see capital being provided for us to expand from Malawi to Nigeria, from Gabon to Kenya? When are we going to see all of this? This is the practical reality that we require Afreximbank to intensify the ability to finance trade on our continent. And so the board of Afreximbank must realize that we have an obligation, that all of us have an obligation to make sure that this young woman that I referred to, that I met in Malawi, small medium enterprise owner, that she's able to expand her business into West Africa, North Africa, and so on. That's what we need. That's why this partnership is so very important. So I want to appreciate very much the support that we get from Afreximbank, from African Development Bank, and other African institutions, because we cannot, and I want to assure you, I am not going to the World Bank and the IMF with cap in hand asking for support. We cannot do that. We as Africans must now, we as Africans must now support our own development, finance our own development. We should no longer continue to go to others to ask them to help us. So I'm very sorry for those, I'm very sorry for those who think that when I go to Brussels next week, I'm going to go and ask the Europeans for more. As a matter of fact, I can tell you publicly, I will go to Brussels and tell the Europeans, do less. Do less. Because we are now, as Africans, standing up on our own feet. We're supporting our own development. We have Afreximbank, we have the African Development Bank. Do less. Do less. We don't need anymore someone to be flown in from Brussels to read Article 19 and say, this is what it says, we're giving you technical support. No, no, we don't need that. We don't need that. So I feel very strongly about this point, and I want to assure you, I'm told the next election for the Secretary General of the AfCFTA is in 2024, in February. I'm prepared to lose the election on this particular point. On this particular point, we are not going to go cap in hand anywhere else except our own institutions in Africa to support the development, the infrastructure that we want to see. That's what we should do. So I want to apologize for speaking too long and for expressing my bias on this issue of Africans having to stand up for the right thing for our continent. I believe that this is the direction that we should take. And I believe that we should be extremely proud of my senior brother, Professor Orama, for the vision and for making sure that we have all the support that we require as Africans to make trade finance a reality. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. Mene, Secretary General of AfCFTA, for the effort, passion directed towards the project and the optimism that we've all felt during your speech. Ladies and gentlemen, may I also recognize the presence of Executive Vice Presidents of Afreximbank, Mr. Dennis Danya, Dr. George Elombi, Mr. Amr Kamel, and Managing Director, Mrs. Canayo Awani. Let me now invite Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Afreximbank. Of course, as been mentioned in the introduction this morning, Afreximbank is committed to $1 billion for the adjustment fund, which will surely give an excellent head start for the whole project. Mr. Orama, I invite you to the podium.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. After the SG has spoken so passionately about Africa for Africans, Africa for Africa's development, and my work has been made so easy. So, Your Excellency, my dear brother, Wankele Mene, the Secretary General of the AfCFTA Secretariat, Excellency Talib Basha, representing the Honorable Minister of Trade of Egypt, Ms. Naveen Gamia, Your Excellency, ambassadors of different African countries, my dear brothers and sisters, the chairperson of the African Business Council, Dr. Asfor, the executive vice presidents of Afreximbank and the managing director for Intra-African trade at the bank, senior government officials from Egypt and other parts of Africa who have joined us online, colleagues at AfCFTA and Afreximbank. I think the two institutions are like one. Dignitaries who I may not be aware of, who may have joined us online. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I join my dear brother, Excellency Wankele Mene, in thanking all of you for joining us to celebrate this auspicious and significant milestone in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We are making progress. The harder they come, the harder they fall. One by one, we will build the architecture that will make the AfCFTA a real implementable agreement and not a political wish. Sparing time for your busy schedules, sparing the time for your busy schedules to witness this historic moment attests to the significance of the adjustment fund to intra-African trade promotion. It tells us that we have an urgency to deliver on the aspirations of our people. This event is being marked by a simple ceremony, but as the Secretary General mentioned, it is historic and will be remembered for many years as we write the history of the implementation of this agreement. It will be studied by so many in the years to come. The event is holding on the heels of other trailblazing initiatives, which we've done collaboratively with the AfCFTA Secretariat and the African Union. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System was launched in Accra on January 13th this year. As you all know, that is a tool that has been developed to make it possible for us to domesticate payments on our continent. It is a one step towards our long-term aspiration of having a single currency for the continent, so that every currency in Africa becomes a legal tender in every other African countries. So you can use Egyptian pound wherever you are in Africa. Every currency becomes convertible on our continent. That is the only way we can progress with this AfCFTA and see the value. That is the only way we can achieve the aspirations of that young woman that the SG mentioned so passionately about. Also, just 3 months ago, in Durban, South Africa, we all participated in the second edition of the Intra-African Trade Fair. The first edition, the inaugural edition, was held here in Cairo in 2018 with the strong support of the Egyptian government. That built the foundation for the second Intra-African Trade Fair, which was very, very successful, attracting 32,000 people, attracting 1,500 exhibitors to the maximum capacity of the exhibition space, and spawning over $42 billion in trade and investment deals, some of which we have started to finance ourselves. We are making progress. And I will advise Secretary General to refer that friend of his who had problems about the influence of Afreximbank to those things, and indeed ask him the role he played in any one of them. These bold steps are strong statements of our collective determination and actions to unleash all arsenals to eliminate the obstacles to intra-African trade and support the work our hardworking brothers and sisters at the AfCFTA Secretariat and our different ministries of trade are doing to ensure we collectively deliver on the aspirations of our leaders who are committed to an integrated continent and charting a new course of using collective self-reliance to promote development on our continent. Your Excellencies, Honorable Minister, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a few days ago, as mentioned by Secretary General Wankele, at their 35th ordinary session in Addis Ababa, the African Union heads of states directed the AfCFTA Secretariat and Afreximbank to undertake all steps, including various private sector fund structures, for the full operationalization of the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund and to avail the facility to state parties. That decision confirmed the urgency they saw regarding this fund. It confirmed to us that our leaders are eager that we pool all our resources together to make sure that the AfCFTA is implemented and becomes effective and benefits our people as quickly as possible. The fund is a necessary tool that will ensure that no country became worse off due to the AfCFTA implementation. Indeed, AfCFTA-led integration will be meaningless unless it results in the economic prosperity of the entire continent. It is meaningless if it brings prosperity to some countries and to some people and businesses and penury and difficulty to others. That will not be the Africa we want. We, the AfCFTA, is helping us to achieve. The AfCFTA Adjustment Fund will therefore foster the equitable distribution of the gains from the free trade agreement by, among others, protecting the most vulnerable from consequences of tariff revenue losses while building and preparing their race sectors and positioning them to take advantage of opportunities that the AfCFTA offers. The adjustment fund is sized at $8 billion with potential to reach $10 billion. Afreximbank board has approved up to $1 billion in support of the fund. And I want to assure you, and also assure the Secretary General, that we know our responsibilities. When the founding fathers who set up this bank, who started to discuss about this bank here in Cairo in 1987, took the decision to set up this bank, they knew that it would be needed towards regional integration. We know what we have to do. And I assure you, we will pursue the mandate relentlessly. We will support the AfCFTA because Africa is our continent. Nobody who wants development goes to beg others to help bring that development. It means that the person does not yet know what he or she wants. When you outsource your development to others, they will tell you how your development will look like. I don't think that's what our children want to see. It has been designed as this fund uniquely to serve all segments of the African economy through segregation into 3 distinct funds. And this is novel. This is the first of its kind. We bring innovation in all the things we do because Africa's problem is different. If we outsource the development of this fund to others, they will design it the way they designed theirs, because they will think that our problem is like their problem when they did theirs. But we designed this because the way we did, because we understand, we are Africans, we understand the peculiarities of our people. We understand what we need to do to make a change on the continent. And we do it knowing that step by step, we make it stronger. Step by step, we will make the naysayers the apostles of the aspirations we champion. Today's signature event of the fund management agreement of the base fund is a direct response to an assurance to the African Union heads of state that all parties, including the AfCFTA Secretariat, Afreximbank, the AU Commission, remain focused to honoring our commitment to them and the African continent. We took on the task of working on this fund, acutely conscious that the task was challenging. We nonetheless gave it all our effort, stayed the course, because we found strength, courage, and comfort in the protections it will bring to countries most dependent on tariff revenues and the inclusivity it will precipitate as we implement the AfCFTA. In addition, the unique partnerships that we forged are so eloquently outlined by Secretary General Wankele, gave us the strength and courage to pursue this initiative without our heads clogged by ideas that are not homegrown. We found partners whose passion for Africa's economic emancipation was unparalleled in the modern era, a passion we share at Afreximbank. The AfCFTA Secretariat took ownership and nurtured it to maturity. And we must all, as Africans, thank all the hardworking members of staff of the Secretariat, under the able leadership of Secretary General Wankele, for the work they've done, not only on this and the other areas. We all know that we just started on this journey. But you can go and take a chart and see all the objectives that have been ticked off as delivered on. And this is one of them. The AU Commission also supported us, providing technical and political support in the process of developing this fund. We thank them all for the unwavering determination to lay the foundation for Africa's integration and economic emancipation. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the agreement Afreximbank will be signing today with the AfCFTA Secretariat formally operationalizes the adjustment fund. It mandates the bank to provide fund management, administrative and secretarial services to the base fund, to collaborate with the AfCFTA Secretariat in mobilizing and facilitating prudent utilization of the fund, while providing technical assistance and working with the Secretariat to evaluate and negotiate investments and divestment opportunities. Ultimately, by providing this service, the bank will ensure that the fund is made available to support countries to address short-term revenue losses that may be incurred when countries liberalize their trade and facilitate African-led industrialization through the development of regional value chains across the continent. It is by implementing this fund that the borders will become open. We should not fool ourselves by what will happen if we do not have this instrument. It's only when we have it that those who feel uncomfortable about implementing fully the commitments they've entered into will become less concerned. And then from learning by doing, we will gradually begin to gain the benefits of implementing this agreement. I just wanted to re-emphasize that this fund will underpin what happens to the implementation of the AfCFTA. Because ultimately, everybody, businesses, countries, will assess the impact on them from a well-being point of view. Your Excellencies, we are most honored to have been given this challenge as fund managers of this fund. It is for these reasons that the bank was created. If we didn't have an Afreximbank, we probably today be scratching our head as to how this fund will be managed and who bring the resources to support it. So we must thank the founding fathers and all the shareholders of Afreximbank and the board of directors of Afreximbank for providing us the support that has made us in management to work with the Secretariat to arrive where we are today, to make us as Africans proud that we are taking our own destiny in our hands. We succeed because we worked hard to succeed. And when we fail, we pick up the pieces and continue because we must get to the destination. We are together building a strong and purposeful financial architecture for the continent geared towards our shared developmental aspirations. Again, I emphasize, this may be a simple ceremony, but the impact is far-reaching. We are on the right path. The progress that has been made since the signature of the AfCFTA has been remarkable. But the task ahead remains daunting. So we must all renew our support for the AfCFTA Secretariat it must not be them and us. I think all of us, all the countries, during negotiations, who are considering all the instruments, including this fund, I think the approach must be that it is we, not them and us. Operationalization of the base fund will require proactive collaborations among our respective institutions. Afreximbank and the AfCFTA Secretariat will continue to count on the invaluable support of all parties, including state parties to the AfCFTA and African financial institutions, our corporations, SMEs, women, youth, for guidance, expert advice, or other forms of support as we lead the implementation of the fund. We also call on all other institutions to join the train in resourcing an urgently needed fund to facilitate a smooth takeoff and the implementation of the AfCFTA. I look forward to working with our esteemed partner, the hardworking team at the AfCFTA Secretariat, and the able leadership led by dear brother, Mr. Kelemene, to build a strong and dynamic African trade sector. I want them to know that they can count on us in a difficult task ahead of them. I also want to thank all the AU leadership to reassure them that the task they've given to us will be pursued with all vigor, because we know that just like them, that is the way we must go as a people. We thank you for your kind attention and look forward to a successful signing ceremony today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Orama, for the speech. And I'd like to remind the journalists joining us virtually that the signing ceremony will be followed by a press conference. And all the journalists who are joining us can submit their questions starting from now via the Q&A button on the Zoom platform. Let me also note that we have great presence by the African ambassadors, and we'd like to welcome them all in today's ceremony. Let me also extend our thanks and appreciation and recognition of the chairman of the Committee of African Affairs in the Egyptian Parliament, the Honorable Sharif El-Gebali, and the chairman of Bank Masr, Mr. Mohammed El-Tribi. We welcome you always on such events, and we're looking forward to a great participation from all the national and national banks for sure, and other financial institutions. I'd like to welcome now Mr. Ali Basha, Minister Plenipotentiary Trade, and he's representing Her Excellency Naveen Gama, the Egyptian Minister of Trade and Industry. الوزير مفوض علي باشا ممثلا عن وزيرة التجارة والصناعة نيفين جامع. أهلا وسهلا.
صباح الخير. Good morning. Excellency Mr. Wamkili Mini, Secretary General of the AfCFTA, Excellency Professor Bandekt Orama, Afreximbank President and the Chairman of the Board of Directors, Your Excellencies, ambassadors of the African member states in Egypt, Honorable, Honorable representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to both Afreximbank President, Professor Bandekt Urama, and AfCFTA SG, Mr. Wamkili Mini, for their kind invitation to attend the signing ceremony of the fund management agreement related to the base fund of the AfCFTA. In fact, AfCFTA shouldn't be considered as a mere trade agreement, but rather a step closer to achieve our vision of an integrated African market and a major instrument for Africa's industrial development. Today, and after a few years of negotiations, we are now getting much closer to taking the AfCFTA out of the treaty text and into the African citizens' lives. But as we do so, we must ensure that the AfCFTA is inclusive to all of us in Africa and a successful enabler to shared growth across the continent. That's particularly why the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund comes as a cornerstone in its domain, as it will provide a platform to achieve important goals, including easing the effect of the tariff revenues losses on some African member states. In addition, supporting and enabling both the public and private sector in the African member states to adjust and take advantage of the opportunities created by the implementation of the AfCFTA. Egypt fully supports this very important initiative and will be actively promoting the engagement of various development partners and financial institutions to provide grants as well as technical and financial resources to support this very important fund. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I want to express my appreciation for all the efforts done by Afreximbank, being the main catalyst for the success of the implementation of AfCFTA. Through the bank mandate of enhancing and promoting intra-African trade between African member states. On the other hand, I would like to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Wamkili Mini, SG, for his sincere efforts, actually, in steering the agreement with national stakeholders to arrange and execute multiple negotiations rounds and conduct formal and non-formal engagements to facilitate and expedite the implementation of the agreement in a remarkable way. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that we all have a great responsibility to ensure that the AfCFTA becomes operational as soon as possible, so that the African citizens can finally benefit from a strong intra-African trading system, enhanced economies based on more industrialization and involvement in the global value chains. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, so we now move to the main event of the day, the signing ceremony. I'd like to invite Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of Afreximbank, and His Excellency Mr. Wamkeli Meni, Secretary General of the AfCFTA, to join us here on stage for the signing ceremony. And of course, I'd like to extend the invitation to Mr. Ali Basha to witness the signing ceremony. الآن توقيع الاتفاقية بحضور بروفيسور أوراما وطبعا معالي السيد ماني وأيضا بحضور وزارة التجارة والصناعة المصرية. I'd like also to invite the executive principals to join us here on stage to be part of the executive vice president of Afreximbank. Thank you so much. Please join us here on stage for the signing ceremony. Executive Vice Presidents of Afreximbank, Mr. Dennis Dania, Dr. George Elambi, Mr. Amr Kamel, and of course, we're honored to have MD with us, Mrs. Canayo Awani on stage.
The lawyers, it's the lawyers. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
We'd just like to take more photos. I'd like to kindly ask the executive vice principals to step down, and we will take a few photos of exchanging the photos. Thank you very much for your effort. Yeah, we're done. For now. الآن صور تذكارية طبعاً لتوقيع الاتفاقية وسيليها مؤتمر صحفي. A press conference will follow, so stay put. طبعاً السادة المصورين لو يحبوا يلتقطوا مزيد من الصور التذكارية لمراسم توقيع الاتفاقية لإطلاق صندوق التكيف. Thank you very much, and I'd like you please to kindly stay with us here on stage, and we announce the beginning of the press conference. Of course, we're welcoming all questions from our journalists joining us here or virtually. As we mentioned before, all our colleagues joining virtually can send their questions through the Zoom link. There's a Q&A button that you can press and send the questions. فقط تنويه لكل زملائنا الصحفيين الذين يشاركون بشكل افتراضي يمكنهم توجيه أي أسئلة من خلال رابط الزوم وسنعرضها فوراً على طبعاً ضيوفنا المتواجدين هنا وهناك ميكروفونات على كل الطاولات لو أي زميل أو زميلة من الصحافة يحب يتوجه ببعض الأسئلة. So I have a few questions that we've received already online. The first one is from Brian Nagugi. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He's representing the Nation Media Group in Nairobi, Kenya. His question goes like that. How do vulnerable countries with possible tariff revenue losses access or tap the AfCFTA adjustment facility, and what will be its terms? Will the financing be offered as a grant to affected countries or as a loan on commercial terms?
Well, thank you very much. There are three funds within the adjustment fund. We have the base fund, we have the general fund, and we have the credit fund. The base fund is a fund contributed largely through by the state parties and through grants that will be provided to the fund. That will go mainly towards compensation payments for tariff revenue losses. There will be a general fund. The general fund will be also delivered largely as grants and technical assistance, concessional funding. That will also go to state parties to enable them to implement some of the protocols in the AfCFTA agreement, to deal with all the social consequences of the agreement, and also go to support some of the companies in the parties to the AfCFTA to prepare them to trade effectively under the agreement. And then you have the credit fund, which will be largely commercial funding and that will go as loans on commercial terms to those who qualify to receive them, which will include countries who may need them to do certain investments that go towards the AfCFTA objectives, to go to companies, go to banks, to make sure that the SMEs, women, businesses, and all those who would normally find it difficult to raise funding, trade finance, and project finance to retool their factories, get access to financing they need. As you can see, the fund has been designed to target all segments of what is required to make the AfCFTA effective, from the government to banks, to corporations, to SMEs, and even special interests, women and youth. Now, each fund has its own eligibility requirement. As I mentioned, obviously the base fund will go largely to state parties, and the state parties have the criteria for accessing the fund because it's for compensation payment, and there are criteria for those who will be eligible to receive them. The general fund will go also to state parties and also to companies. The credit fund can go to also companies and state parties, but those will be for commercial activities that will support the AfCFTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To add anything, Your Excellency, Mr. Mane.
Well, thank you very much. I won't be long because I think President has addressed most of all of the points that were raised. What I would say is this, that we want to make sure that in the implementation of the AfCFTA, that there is inclusivity of benefits, that African countries, whether they are big or small, whether they are industrialized or not industrialized, we want to make sure that everybody benefits and that everybody, all countries, are starting from the same point, the same vintage point. Now, in relation to criteria for, you have to be a state party, of course, to the AfCFTA. You have to indicate that you have suffered revenue losses as a result of implementation of the AfCFTA. These are the core indicators for eligibility for.
Is there a benchmark, Your Excellency, for the level of losses?
No, there's no benchmark for the level of losses because we don't want it. You can have a country that is relatively industrialized that will say, let's take the country that I come from, South Africa, that will say textiles and clothing. We have lost in the sector of textiles and clothing. Can we get assistance to make sure that we become more competitive in textiles and clothing? So big or small, we will look at, on the merits, we will look at what the country advances as a point of loss, and we will look at that. We want to get to a point in future, we want to get to a point where tariffs and the reduction of tariffs are no longer in future are no longer a source of revenue, fiscal mobilization, that it is not that way. We want to get to a point where tariffs are actually a tool for industrial development, not for revenue generation, which is what we've had in Africa for the last almost 70 years. We must transform from that and become a continent where we use tariffs for industrial development, not for revenue generation. And so I think this is today, in my view, is the start of that transition from a perspective of trade policy. Thank you.
Excellent. We have another question that we've received online from Hope Moses, a Chic Business Day, Nigeria. And the questions, I think they've been covered in the introduction and the presentation in the morning, but maybe we can recap on the amount established in the base fund of the AfCFTA adjustment facility. And the other question from the same journalist, what are the requirements for accessing the fund by member countries? I think also this has been covered by His Excellency, Mr. Meni, just previously. So can we recap on the amounts of the base fund again?
No, thank you. The total fund size, as I said, is $8 billion with potential to rise to $10 billion overall.
$10 billion within 6 years?
Yeah, from 5 to 10 years. Yes.
Okay. We have another question from Zimbabwe this time. Katambi Bulawayo, I'm sorry. Does the AfCFTA Secretariat intend to create a Pan-African currency? And what are the timelines for this? العملة الإفريقية الموحدة طبعا سؤال دايما مطروح فيما يتعلق بالشأن الإفريقي.
Well, thank you very much again to our colleague in Zimbabwe. As you know, the Abuja Treaty, it sets out the stages of Africa's integration. We are now in the stage of developing a common market. The next milestone, a very, very big milestone, which will happen, I'm sure it will happen, but we cannot say when, is a monetary union. Of course, we know that there are a number of issues to consider, monetary policy convergence, range of different issues, factors to consider. So we're not there yet, we aspire to be there. But what we do have as a starting point, and this is now with the support of Afreximbank, we have the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. We are now, in a sense, we are now leapfrogging because you will now be able to trade using your own local currency. You are not going to have the challenges anymore of the cost of currency convertibility, the inefficiency, the affordability of that. So the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is taking us in the direction, it is a step in the direction that our friend from Zimbabwe is pointing to, which is essential that we must move towards a monetary union. And I believe that the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is a step in that direction. Let's remember how long it took Europe to get to a monetary zone. Almost 65 years. And the biggest challenge, we know from the experience of the European Union, the biggest challenge was the convergence criteria. And it's going to be the same for us too. The biggest challenge is going to be the convergence criteria to get us to the point of a single currency. But in the meantime, we must do what we can to make sure that trade in Africa is affordable. And that's why the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System is so critical to our integration as a continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from our journalists here? Yes, توجد أسئلة من القاعة. يا ريت لو حضرتك تقولي اسمك والسؤال موجه لمين.
أميرة سعيد من وكالة أنباء الشرق الأوسط. أنا كنت بس عايزة أسأل السؤال موجه في العموم، يعني عايزة أعرف المهام المحددة للصندوق، يعني التمويل ده هيستخدم في آليات معينة لتيسير التجارة. اتقال بعض منها وهي تعويض التعريفات الجمركية اللي هتفقدها الدول جراء تطبيق اتفاقية منطقة التجارة الحرة الأفريقية، ولكن أنا عايزة أعرف برضو المبلغ المرصود ده برضو في دعم للمشروعات الصغيرة والمتوسطة ورواد الأعمال وصغار المستثمرين وهكذا. الآلية هتمشي ازاي؟ هل هي عبر إقراض أو عبر إيه بالظبط للمستثمرين الصغيرين أو رواد الأعمال أو الأشخاص دي؟ ازاي يعني تستفيد من هذه الآلية لدعم استثماراتهم أو أعمالهم الصغيرة؟ شكرا.
شكرا أستاذة أميرة.
Thank you very much. I thought I clarified when I spoke earlier. There are three funds. The base fund, as I said earlier, will benefit largely government, that is those who are parties to the AfCFTA. And those who are parties to the AfCFTA are those who have signed and ratified the agreement, that is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And it will be targeted as a compensation fund for revenue losses. The general fund will benefit, again, governments who are state parties, and also the businesses, which include all aspects, companies, SMEs, and so on and so forth. But it will be provided on concessional terms largely. And it will be used also to implement the protocols. There are different protocols under the agreement. So this concessional funding, that technical assistance that will be provided through this fund will help countries to implement those protocols and also support companies that need help, training, and even those who want to do market access studies and so on and so forth, that have to be done on concessional terms or technical assistance and so on and so forth. The credit fund will be provided commercially. It will go to all those who are implementing commercial projects, and that can also be government. But we expect that it will be largely companies and SMEs and financial institutions who are financing certain kinds of trade. They will use it largely for companies to retool their factories. Some of the factories are today import substitution factories producing for the home. But now they have to produce to export. So that will require certain retooling to make them more efficient and to be able to improve the quality of what they export. It also enabled them to procure raw materials, buy goods, perhaps from other African countries, and so on and so forth. So The different funds have different purposes and uses, and it will target different segments of the society. Everybody will be covered: entrepreneurs, women, youth, banks, government. Nobody will be excluded. The Secretary General mentioned that the goal is inclusivity, and that's what this fund will be aspiring to. Thank you.
We have many questions coming online. Bihakula asks, how are you as the partners of Afreximbank and AfCFTA going to ensure that women and youth are active players in this transformation process so that the end result addresses their needs in terms of financial and economic inclusion?
Oh, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge is how do we make sure that there is inclusivity of benefits coming out of this trade agreement. That is why we went to the heads of states in December 2020, and we said, we want to make sure that we codify, put into law, benefits of this agreement. And the heads of state said, yes, we agree with you. We direct you to negotiate a protocol on women and youth in trade. So we have now started that process of negotiating a protocol on women and youth in trade. The protocol is going to be more than, we have been making speeches for years about how young people must benefit. Many, many years. Very good speeches, very good ideas. Now we need concrete action. So that's what the protocol is going to do. It is going to enable us to take concrete affirmative action for young Africans, for women-led small, medium enterprises, so that they are at the center of benefiting from this agreement. We learned from the experience of others around the world. And we learned that if a trade agreement benefits only the big corporations, it is not going to succeed. As a matter of fact, it will lead to a backlash. We know that from the experience of others. Or if it does not succeed in inclusivity, it is going to lead to conditions that we see in some parts of the world where there is a rise of fundamental right-wing fascism that says trade agreements don't work, they benefit only the elite, you should reject globalization, you should reject these trade agreements, come with us as right-wing fascist fundamentalist movements. We are providing the solutions to the problems of the world, and the solutions is autarky, looking inward, and everybody else must be on the outside. That's what we learned from trade agreements that are not inclusive. They lead to what we have seen in some parts of Europe, and most recently in the United States under the previous administration, where the government was saying, we don't want to be in a trade agreement with Mexico because a trade agreement with Mexico takes jobs away from Americans to Mexico. Let's reject these trade agreements. They don't work. So we must learn from that lesson. And I believe the lesson is inclusivity. Inclusivity of benefits. And at the center of that, it must be young Africans, young entrepreneurs. It must be small, medium enterprises that are led by women. We know that on our continent, over 60% of Africa's GDP comes from small, medium enterprises, creating over 400 million jobs. That's why we have to place them at the center of benefits. And we know also that it is more difficult for a small medium enterprise to expand from Nigeria to Kenya in terms of market access. It is much easier for my friend, the managing director of Zenith Bank, it's much easier for him to move from Nigeria to Kenya as a large corporation. Much easier. He has an army of lawyers, he has technicians, very easy for him to benefit from this agreement. But it is incredibly more difficult if you are a small, medium enterprise. That's what I want us to make sure we do. We make sure that there are inclusive benefits for small, medium enterprises to expand into the continent, to grow their businesses, to make sure that there's development on our continent through trade. Otherwise, we will have a Donald Trump on our continent who will say, you see what they did? They created a trade agreement that benefits only the elite. That's what, if we don't take concrete steps to make sure that young Africans, small, medium enterprises benefit, we will be creating a Donald Trump on our continent who will say that trade agreements don't work. And we must avoid that.
You put it beautifully, inclusivity of benefits, of course. We have a question from our journalists here. اتفضلي حضرتك.
ده شغال؟ منال عمر من جريدة العالم اليوم. كنت عايزة أسأل مستر بندكت عن هو قال إن حجم الصندوق رأس ماله هيبقى من بين 8 وممكن يوصل ل10 في غضون من 5 ل 10 سنوات. فكنت عايزة أسأله هل هم هيخاطبوا دول مؤسسات مالية دولية زي البنك الأفريقي للتنمية أو بنوك تجارية مصرية إنها تدخل تساهم في رأس مال الصندوق وتضخوا فلوس عشان تقدر تمول يساهموا في تمويلات في حاجات زي كده في الدول الأفريقية؟ فكنت عايزة أسأل المصادر بتاعت الصندوق أو حجم الصندوق هتيجي من أي جهات بالظبط؟ شكرا.
شكرا يا أستاذة.
Thank you very much. You see, I just go through what I've said several times. We have 3 funds. Those 3 funds have different purposes. So we will be looking for sources of funds for grants, concessional funding, technical assistance, and commercial funding. So these are the kind of funds we'll be looking for. The sources of funds also would reflect this. And they include state parties themselves that we expect will contribute. But I've just announced that the contribution of Afreximbank of $1 billion. There are other financial institutions. And as the AG said in his statement, we will be knocking on the doors of African financial institutions first, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, the African Development Bank, the Trade Development Bank, Africa Finance Corporation, Development Bank of South Africa, the National Bank of Egypt, Bank Miss, Bank du Caire, the central banks who have all these reserves. The kind of funding Afreximbank has long history of mobilizing. Those are the kind of things we'll be looking to mobilize to support the different buckets we have put. We also will have people who are operating on the funds who may want to also benefit. The commercial fund, that's a credit fund, will provide returns not different from what investors look for. So we expect that it will attract support, significant support. We also expect that development-minded institutions will contribute to the funds we need to implement the general fund and also the base fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move to another question. I think it's been covered, but just for the sake of answering the journalists joining us online, it's from Ndamu Sandu Business, Times newspaper in Zimbabwe. do these funds cater for only those countries that have signed and ratified the AfCFTA? I think they have to, right? And you've mentioned it, Mr. Many. Another question from Ethiopia, Mengistu Berhamo. What is the timeline to start PAPSS platform in Ethiopia? The timeline to start the PAPSS platform in Ethiopia, the payments platform.
No, thank you. I just came back from Ethiopia this morning. Yesterday we signed a memorandum of understanding with the National Bank of Ethiopia. A key element of that memorandum of understanding is the participation in the PAPS. So they are participating in the PAPS. Our PAPS team are supposed to go there this week to finalize the negotiation for them to sign and join the payment system. And the benefit of their signing the payments, they join the payment system is very good to benefit so many people. Ethiopia is undertaking major investments in infrastructure, just like many African countries. Investments in infrastructure in many African countries, about $50 to $60 billion per year. Currently, those go to so many companies and contractors outside Africa. But we have strong contractors here in Egypt, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Burkina Faso. We finance. But sometimes when there's a tender in Africa to participate in some of these 50, 60 billion, they lose out. So that because some of the countries that are bidding against them have very cheap sources of funds. But today, with PAPS, an African contractor can bid for the contract in the national currency of the country where that contract will be awarded. That will change the whole story. We will give our companies the opportunity to benefit. And I'm saying this because of the kind of investments going on in Ethiopia, and the opportunity our companies have everywhere, those who can offer the services I just mentioned. And we expect that the PAPS will then help reduce the foreign debt of many African countries, because a main source of the foreign debt is investments in infrastructure where we borrow to build the roads, the railways we need, and so on. But when we borrow these monies, of course, we expect to pay them, and they build up and start causing problems of foreign debt. So perhaps we have convert those foreign debt to domestic debt in the local currencies of the countries. And that's why we believe that, and the National Bank of Ethiopia was very eager to work with us to ensure that they participate. And we are also eager because it opens the Ethiopian market to contractors and also other people who are selling into it from different parts of Africa, giving us the opportunity to gain from the AfCFTA even more than we would have if we didn't have that payment system. Thank you.
Thank you. هل في أسئلة من زملائنا في القاعة قبل ما ننتقل للأسئلة؟ تفضلي حضرتك.
Hello. Hello.
Amanda Dessouky from Nile TV International, reporter and journalist. Want to ask about the private sector. How can we support it to effectively participate in the new trading environment? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think again, the question goes to the fundamental point that President and I have been making, and that is what kind of tools do we devise to make sure that that small medium enterprises benefit? What kind of capacity building do we ensure for small medium enterprises to be what bankers call bankable, so that they are eligible for finance facilities that will enable them to grow? So we have to focus on building the capacity of small medium enterprises to be eligible for export, to be eligible and to qualify for finance facilities. As a secretariat, of course, that is not our mandate. So we will work very closely with Afreximbank, with the African Development Bank, Trade and Development Bank, and others, to make sure that we build the capacity of our small medium enterprises to be eligible from the finance facilities that should be available. So this is what you've reflected is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge that we have. How do we get our small medium enterprises to be eligible, to qualify? And we have to make sure that we give them that capacity to qualify for. I'm told that most African banks, commercial banks, have trade finance facilities. CEO of one of the biggest banks in Africa told me that they have billions in trade finance, in their trade finance portfolio, but the uptake is very low. And the reason the uptake is very low is, of course, because of the terms, and second, because small medium enterprises, they don't have the capacity to meet the requirements for eligibility. So that's what we have to focus on, to make sure that it's not, the barrier is not only the high rate of interest, but that it is also the ability of our small medium enterprises to meet the criteria to then get the funding. This, for me, is the biggest challenge that we have. And we are going to make sure that we work with our commercial banks, with our in Africa, with our development finance institutions, to really focus on this issue. How is it that you, as a commercial bank, you have $700–800 million in a trade finance facility, but the uptake is very, very low? We must ask the question. I'm not a banker, but we must ask the question, how do we make it easier? So this, for me, is the issue that we must be focusing on. We have resources, the funds are there, but the uptake is low. The uptake is low because of the stringent conditions for accessing the funds. There are some banks that are saying, well, if you want us, Secretary General, if you want us to move Continental and provide this facility throughout the continent, we want a sovereign guarantee. We want to make sure that risk mitigation is very, very clear. And I can understand that, but we must get to a point where really and truly, just like other parts of the world, where really and truly we have a continental fund for small medium enterprises, for risk mitigation, for those who lend money. I know that Afreximbank has recently launched a facility for small medium enterprises. So we have to mobilize our commercial banks, our development finance institutions. We have to mobilize them to make more funding available. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe there's a question in the back here.
Hello, I am Dua Saber representing Taqa Arabiya. As our main concern is scaling up access to energy for Africans, as we all know, over 640 million Africans have no access to energy. So are you considering funding in parallel small or big scale projects that provide energy to the small and medium enterprises projects, green options to provide energy for the projects? Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the energy sector.
Thank you very much. This is a sector-specific fund. However, countries who are benefiting, or companies who are benefiting from the, say, the credit fund or even the general fund may feel that the constraint to participation in the AfCFTA, the market has been created, is energy, and maybe they borrow to be able to fix that. But we do not have a specific energy fund. But I can assure you many banks, commercial banks, development banks on the continent have facilities, Afreximbank does have, including those you need to do green energy. But the fund is, as the name indicates, AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. It's a sector fund, but that does not mean it excludes, is being used for energy projects, but that will be dependent on how that affects the beneficiaries' participation in the AfCFTA. Thank you.
We have a question from Jean Arsène Yurima. What is the AfCFTA approach to harmonize the different regulations and achieve the objective of using tariff to promote industrialization?
Well, thank you very much. Regulatory harmonization is one of the main goals of the AfCFTA, if not the main goal. I want to give an example. A CEO of a global auto manufacturing company said to me, in East Africa, in North Africa, in Southern Africa, we have manufacturing plants. East Africa, local content for vehicles is 30%, Southern Africa, 40%, North Africa, a different. He said to me, this is a barrier to investment. So you have to make sure that you accelerate conclusion of harmonization of these rules. Because if as an investor, as a large auto manufacturing company, we want to invest in Zambia, in Kenya, in Togo, and we want to be able to move our components seamlessly throughout the continent. But we can't do that if in this region you have this rule, in that region you have this rule. So what we are trying to do is exactly what the question is, regulatory harmonization. As I speak to you today, the heads of states just adopted the recommendations of the ministers of trade, in which 87.7% convergence in Africa on the same local content rules. It's remarkable. If you think about it, there are over 6,000 products under the World Customs Organization, what they call the harmonized system, over 6,000 traded products. And as Africa, we have agreed on a single rule, 87.7%. So we are moving in that direction of regulatory harmonization, whether it is for goods, for services, and indeed even in areas like sanitary and phytosanitary, public health, trade facilitation, goods in transit. We are moving to a direction of harmonization. Of course, the countries are at different levels of capacity to implement these newly harmonized rules. We must expect that it is going to take us time.
But
I want to go
like
back.
a timeline for that, for reaching the complete harmonization.
Well, we have already agreed on the rules. For example, on trade facilitation, on customs procedures, there's a common standard. The issue is, at what point will our governments, our customs officers, for example, be able to implement the same agreed to rules for goods in transit? That's where we have to build the capacity for implementation of the agreed rules. So I believe that we have taken the first step. We have the harmonized rules for trade facilitation, for customs procedures, for goods in transit, but we are at different levels of capacity of implementation of these harmonized rules. It is going to take us time. As I said before, it took the European Union 72 years to get to this degree of regulatory harmonization and implementation. So it is going to take us time too to get to that point. But we have the baseline, we have the starting point of the rules that all African countries who are state parties to the AfCFTA that they have agreed to.
Well, thank you very much. This concludes our Q&A session and the press conference. Of course, we are appreciating the participation from our journalists here and also via the internet. We will now move to the photo session. I kindly ask our distinguished guests to step down for the photography. I'd like to invite first Professor Orama and His Excellency Wamkelimeni. Just right here in the front. I'd like to invite Mr. Ali Besha to join us for a photo, please. And if we can be joined by the Executive Vice Presidents of Afreximbank and MD Mrs. Canayo Awani. So Executive Vice Presidents of Afreximbank, Mr. Dennis Danya, Dr. George Elambi, Mr. Amr Kamel, would you kindly join us? our esteemed ambassadors joining us today. If you would join us on stage so we can have a better angle for the picture. We'd love to have you on stage to commemorate this ceremony. The ambassadors of the African states present today in the signing ceremony, we kindly invite you to join us on stage. It would be great if we use the leveling to get a better picture. There are stairs on both sides. Thank you so much for your participation. We kindly ask you to stay with us. Dr. Amani Asfour, with her beautiful red color. Ambassador Mona Omar, Her Excellency Ambassador Mona Omar. The CEOs of the commercial banks. Do we still have representatives from the banks? I think they're not present here. No, some of them are here. Please join us. So basically, our financial partners, we welcome you on stage for a photo. Yes. And وسيادة النائب شريف الجبلي, the Honorable Sharif Al-Gabali. We thank all our esteemed partners and distinguished guests for their cooperation. I kindly ask you to be seated. We'll be serving lunch very shortly. Meanwhile, I'd like to invite MD Mrs. Canayo Awani for her vote of thanks. There's another photo, a last one with the staff, with Afreximbank staff. And the AfCFTA. Thank you for the reminder. We cannot conclude this without having all the staff who made this possible join us in a photo. هذه صورة تذكارية طبعاً لمجموعة العمل في أفراكسمبانك وأيضاً في السكرتارية الخاصة بالاتفاقية التجارة الحرة. Thank you so very much for all the effort and for being with us today. I'd like to invite Managing Director, Mrs. Canayo Awani, for her vote of thanks. And this will be followed by a lunch that will be served right here in the hall. A final speech. Thank you very much. Mrs. Canayo Awani, Managing Director, will be joining us for her vote of thanks. Please. Would you be seated, please? السادة الزملاء أرجو التزام أماكنكم. لدينا الكلمة الختامية للسيدة كانايو أواني. We have the vote of thanks by Mrs. Canayo Awani, Managing Director of Intra-African Trade Initiative, Afreximbank. If you would kindly take your seats while she addresses the floor.
A very good afternoon to you all. And in the interest of time, I will stand on the already well-established protocols. I'm also mindful that I'm standing between you all and lunch. On behalf of the African Export-Import Bank, our partner, AfCFTA Secretariat, I am truly honored to be proposing this vote of thanks on this landmark occasion of the signing of the fund management agreement between the African Export-Import Bank and the AfCFTA Secretariat for the base fund component of the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. Today, we've had the opportunity to listen and learn about this, the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund, its components, as well as witness the signing of the fund management agreement that sets the platform for the operationalization of the fund. However, I would like us to take one moment and reflect on the significance of the events that just took place. Just one moment. Your Excellencies, let me quote the author, Idowu Konyenikon, which summarizes the spirit and the ethos of today's event, has been mentioned severally. And I quote, "When you do the things in the present that you can see, you're shaping the future that you are yet to see." I would like to repeat that quote again. When you do things in the present that you can see, you're shaping the future of that you're yet to see. We have taken bold steps as a continent to shape our future. In 2018, our leaders signed the AfCFTA agreement, creating an integrated market of about 1.2 billion people. The AfCFTA is an opportunity to reverse engineer the colonial strategy, which confined Africa to the margins of the global economy as a source of raw materials and captive markets for the value-added exports of others. The AfCFTA promises to change this. We must ride on the AfCFTA and the collective will of our leaders and all African people to ensure we determine our own developmental path. So much of that has been said today. We at Afreximbank recognize the importance of the AfCFTA in Africa's transformation. That is why we have been aggressively supporting intra-African trade and have been unrelenting, no matter what anybody says, in our support to the AfCFTA through the range of initiatives. Key among this is the Adjustment Fund, an instrument that will ensure that African countries are able to take bold steps necessary to implement the agreement whilst minimizing any potential economic disruptions. Today's signing marks another chapter in the strong cooperation between Afreximbank and AfCFTA. It follows closely, as been previously mentioned, after the successful organization of the Intra-African Trade Fair that held in Durban in November last year, and the recent commercial launch of the Pan-African Payment Settlement System in Accra last month. All milestones in the journey toward economic emancipation. Through the agreement signed today, we'll be able to mobilize the financial and technical resources to drive Africa's trade development. On behalf of the bank and the AfCFTA Secretariat, I therefore extend a very hearty thanks to all of you for gracing this historic signing ceremony, physically and virtually. I must particularly thank the representative of the Honorable Minister of Trade, Mr. Ali Bashar, Minister Plenipotentiary of Trade of the Arab Republic of Egypt. It's also with a deep sense of appreciation that I must acknowledge the principles and the leadership of the African Export-Import Bank, our President, Professor Rama, the leadership of the AfCFTA Secretariat, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, and I also acknowledge the AU Commission as well in this appreciation. Your Excellencies, please allow me also to give special thanks to those who worked tirelessly in getting us to this point. My special thanks go to Mr. Andrew Gamble, who worked tirelessly with us in formulating the overall agreements and the documentation with our legal team, as well as assisted in drafting the fund agreement, management agreement on the day's fund. I must also thank our technical teams, the teams of Afreximbank and AfCFTA, who did the heavy lifting, the cross-functional teams of both organizations, and worked assiduously to organize the event and ensure that the agreement was signed today. For all your hard work, I say thank you. Excellencies, intra-African trade champions represented here today, many of you who are already benefiting from Afreximbank's intervention to explore opportunities and markets across Africa. Esteemed guests, pressmen and women, a director of programs, we appreciate you and we say thank you. But let me also say upfront that there's so much more to be done. We shall be calling on you again for sure. But take comfort in knowing that our efforts are all for the benefit of our beloved continent and for future generations of Africans. Today, as we depart from our various destinations, I wish you all safe travels and journey mercies. God bless you all and enjoy your lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Canayo Awani, Intra-African Trade Initiative MD. We thank you all for being here today and making this happen. And I really enjoyed working with the team today. Thank you so much for being part of this, for making me feel part of this important initiative. And I hope you enjoy your lunch. Thank you. Bye-bye.